Hello, dear friends, I hope you're doing well. What is the subjunctive mood in the grammar of a given language? How does English differ from, say, French and Spanish in its realization of the subjunctive on verbs? How can we exploit our knowledge of the subjunctive in order for a better and more accurate academic writing? We will try to address each of these questions in this video, but before that I would like to reiterate my thanks to all of you, especially for your words of encouragement and for your comments. The first point to start with is a characteristic of the English language whose morphological system is characterized by a high level of poverty. Unlike French, Spanish, Arabic, Amazigh, English is the system with the weakest morphology. In what way? Take, for example, the ending of verbs as we conjugate them. If we take the simple present, for example, in French you have a first group verb like manger, which is realized as je mange with an E in the end, tu manges with ES, il mange with an E, nous mangeons, O-N-S-E-Z and E-N-T. These are verb endings in French, at least in the written form. In English, however, the system is much simpler in the sense that the student needs to care just about the third person singular S. Other examples of the poverty of the morphology of the English language is that English, for example, does not mark nouns for case, like for example Arabic, where you have a word like at-talibu, at-taliba, at-talibi, depending on context. But in English, a case is not concrete, except perhaps when we talk about the personal pronouns like he versus him, she versus her, etc. All in all, English is morphologically poor. French and Spanish are morphologically richer. Okay, French and Spanish because they are European languages and they share a common origin with English. Now, with this background in mind, we will move to the notion of the subjunctive. What is the subjunctive mood? The subjunctive mood refers to the marking of a verb when it expresses a hypothesis, a wish, a desire, or an order. This is distinguished from a verb that reveals a piece of information, hence the word indicative, because we indicate that the event has happened. Like when I say it has rained heavily today, this is indicative because I am indicating the fact that it has rained, that there has been some rain today. Other than the subjunctive and the indicative, we have the imperative mood. The imperative simply, as you know, that's just a restatement of something that you already know, but this is very brief. It's when you point and when you make a direct order to someone like do your job, write the paragraph, and so on and so forth. And the imperative, as we know, usually ends with an exclamation mark. This said, the subjunctive mood in English has been on the wane over centuries. If we compare a typical text in Old English with a typical text in modern English, there are high chances for us to find that there are more verbs in the Old English text that are marked for the subjunctive than is the case with present-day English text. Middle English has shown the transition from Old English into modern English. These are some examples from Old English with correspondence in modern English. It's just one way of showing how much of the morphology has been lost in the English language. However, there are certain rules that we need to observe as academic writers. In academic writing, in formal writing, we have to observe the rule of the subjunctive. Now we move to how the subjunctive is marked in the English language. But before that, let me just show you the comparison with French and also with Spanish. This is going to be very brief because our objective is not to talk about Spanish and French. For example, you have to finish on time. The translation in French is il faut que tu, and then you have the verb finish. In English, you have to, and then you have finish. It's like the indicative you finish. But in French, no. Tu finis, je finis, tu finis, elle finit. But when you have il faut que, the verb should necessarily be put in the subjunctive mood. Il faut que tu finisses. Revenir, il faut que tu reviennes. While in the indicative, je reviens, tu reviens, il revient, etc. There are many contexts in French that necessitate the subjunctive, while they can be simple indicatives in the English language, and this is what makes, fortunately, this is what makes English easier to learn. In Spanish, the verb, for example, to drink is beber. From there comes boire. In French, that's the same origin because they come from Latin. Usually we conjugate the verb, and this is a pattern, bebo, bebes, bebe, bebemos, etc. with all these endings. But in the subjunctive, dudo que bebas, I doubt that you drink. This is a sign that Spanish, again, like French, is more difficult to learn, when it comes to its morphology and the rules underlying that, than is the English language. And now let's come to the uses of the subjunctive in English. Surprise, all that we need to do to indicate that the verb is in the subjunctive is to use the bare infinitive, the infinitive without to. So whatever verb there is, to climb a tree, the subjunctive is climb. And to drink water, the subjunctive is drink, no matter what the pronoun before it is. Let's give some examples. Before we provide examples, we would like to make the point that the subjunctive in English can be used in a number of contexts. The most famous of which is we use the conditional verb to be with conditional type to. So instead of saying I was, it's I were across the paradigm. If I were you, if I were here, if I were a doctor, it's never if I was. If my friend were with us, it's not if my friend was with us. And this is a marking of the subjunctive mood. It's the subjunctive in the past, because we have if plus simple past as a rule for conditional type 2. Other than this, we have a very important context that very few, unfortunately, among our students know. It's with mandative verbs. What is a mandative verb? A mandative verb is a verb that expresses a form of authority or a request. Okay, authority, request, followed with that. For example, we have the word necessitate, or require, or demand, or stipulate, and you have other verbs that express authority. I will write the list on the screen. So when these verbs are followed with that, as I said, the verb after has to be in the subjunctive mood, no matter what the pronoun is. Let's give an example. When I say in the indicative, the secretary arrive on time, arrive between brackets, we are obliged to write the S there because we have a sentence and we have third person singular, we have the simple present tense, so we have to add the S. The secretary arrives on time. But just imagine that we have a secretary that does not come on time and that the boss would like the secretary to come on time. So he can tell someone, or in a meeting he can make the point that the secretary has to be there on time. So one way of saying this is as follows. The boss requires that the secretary arrive on time, not arrives. Arrives here would be a mistake. All right? Because we have a verb that expresses authority, a mandative verb followed with that. Here's another example. He, and then the verb to be, and then call in the indicative. When we want to give an information, we need to conjugate the verb to be in the simple present. So we have to say, he is called. But just imagine that there is some noise in an office, and then the boss hears the noise from the other office, and he can make the point that the context of work, this context, this setting, requires that he be quiet. Not he is quiet, because we have before it we have a mandative verb. Before I move on to the other cases of the subjunctive, here is an exercise for those of you who are interested in some practice. You can choose to write in the form of comments. You make sentences with these mandative verbs plus the subjunctive, and try to, because the others will not, the other pronouns will not show you the subjunctive, try to use the third person singular just to get some practice on this. And now let's move on to the other, situations where the subjunctive in English can be used. Because, as I said, the subjunctive in the English language is on the wane, it's on the way of extinction. What we have are just residues of the subjunctive in formulaic speech. And we know that formulaic speech, in the form of frozen structures, like some idiomatic expressions, that cannot be understood unless they are together. You see? So here, in these frozen structures, some of these frozen structures survive in present-day English, and they survive with their subjunctive. For example, in my classroom, students, be they males or females, have to abide by the dress code of the institution. Students, be they. It means whether they are. Be they. Any student, be he from the city or outside the city, has to comply with the rules, etc. So you have be he, be she, be they. All right. Other cases of the subjunctive in phrases like, still with these frozen structures, like when you say, God bless you. Normally, it's God blesses you. You have the expression also of be that as it may. Be that as it may. And by the way, this is very good in academic writing. It beautifies it somehow. One way of saying at any rate, or anyhow, or anyway, or in any case, we can say be that as it may. You also have an expression like the powers that be. The powers that be. The powers that be means the people who are governing, the people who constitute the government. And they have this prerogative of instituting laws. For example, you can say the new law has been instituted by the powers that be, not the powers that are or that are existent or whatever. And you have the famous expression, if need be, means if there is a need for that. I will provide you with further copies if need be. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. So let's meet on another occasion.